yes, there is an AI hub that's happening, but African countries are also seeing the real value. They want to see what can this technology do for public transportation? What can this technology do for administration? It's really not just about the fear of missing out. It's really about looking at the consequences of being left behind. We were left behind during the first, second, and third industrial revolutions. And now African countries are saying with the fourth industrial revolution, we cannot afford to be left out.
Hi, this is Chloe Teevan, and this is Europolis, the Global Europe podcast. In the past few years, AI discussions have been dominated by big tech's framing of what AI is, generative AI, what the goal should be, artificial general intelligence, and how to get there. More compute, more data, and more dollars. Yet as the dust settles, there is a growing chorus of questions about who benefits from this approach to AI development. For many peoples and countries around the world, the current focus on generative AI may even be contrary to their developmental needs, if not adapted to their population's realities and priorities, regulated properly, and linking to local innovation ecosystems. Today I'm joined by Melody Musoni, who leads our work at ECDPM on African digital policies and strategies, and has a particular interest in looking at how Africa can play a role in developing AI that meets the needs of local users on the African continent and in African contexts.
Hi, Chloe. Thank you for having me.
So there's been a growing number of critiques in recent months and years about kind of expressing issues with the current approach to AI development. You're working a lot on AI in the African context. Could you tell us a little bit more about some of the critiques that you're hearing from an African perspective?
Thank you very much, Chloe. I think maybe the starting point to our conversation is mainly understanding some of the questions around the relevance and importance of talking about AI within the African context and looking at whether AI can actually lead to social and economic development in Africa. So you see that I would say we have two camps, two groups of people. We have pessimists and of course we have optimists. So with pessimists, they are really concerned about this whole AI hype and looking at actually who is pushing for this AI and AI revolution in Africa. And of course, like you put it, that it's mainly the big tech who are trying to drive profits. And a lot of this conversation around AI development are being framed through that lens. So without really looking at understanding some of the risks that come with AI, we know from the research that has been done before that a lot of AI models are by nature biased because the data that was used to build these AI models was biased, and that can lead to discrimination and inequalities. So there's always those concerns and worries that people have to say, why are we really talking about AI and prioritizing AI conversations within the African context without actually looking more into some of these concerns and AI risks. And some of the risks, of course, they are unknown. So we are treading in an environment where we really don't know the extent to which this technology can actually harm human rights and harm societies. And then, of course, there is always that question of, do we really need to have techno solutions to some of the challenges that Africa currently has? And which I believe also makes sense if we are to go into a community and we want to talk about artificial intelligence. They will definitely ask you that what's the relevance of AI when we don't have clean running water? What is the relevance of us talking about AI in primary schools when learners are hungry and they're coming to school hungry? So those are some of the realities that are on the ground to say, in as much as this technology can afford us to have economic growth, is that really a priority that we have? And of course, the other camp or the viewpoint is mainly being more optimistic and actually understanding that through this technology that we have the opportunity to actually leapfrog all the challenges that we have, food insecurity, the challenges that we have with climate change, we can mitigate those if we are able to actually deploy and use AI technologies. Of course, we can't talk about AI governance in Africa without looking at the external factors. And of course, that's where there is this, I think for the past 2-3 years, there's been this whole conversation about African voices missing within the global AI governance. And I see that there has been a bit of traction, and we see more and more African countries actively being involved. But that's not the full picture. We still need to look at what is these external influences mean for AI governance in Africa. But I believe they are also contributing to the standpoint that a lot of African countries are now taking to say, maybe we need to slow down a bit on regulation and governance and focus more on what we can do to attract AI companies, to attract big tech companies to actually come and invest in our countries. So there is that ongoing conversation and critique around AI governance. Say, should we regulate? Maybe. When should we regulate?
So yeah, this is really interesting because it ties in with kind of some of the earlier episodes that we've done, which are also discussing how the conversation is changing in Europe when it comes to the previous approach was very much we're going to regulate the digital space and create space that way for a European digital ecosystem, and that didn't really work. So there has been this big shift with the new commission, with the Draghi report last year, away from regulating or exclusively regulating towards much more of an approach based on industrial policy and based on investing in these technologies, as well as kind of trying to simplify the existing regulation. So I think it's very much a global phenomenon that you're identifying. But I think it's very interesting what you say in terms of like the fact that it has then slowed down these conversations about regulation in the African context. And I think you have made this case before that ultimately, first and foremost, African countries really need to focus on data protection, right? Before thinking about more all-encompassing AI regulations. So this is, I think, this is something that you've already looked at in previous work, and I think that we will continue to look at it over the coming years as well. But maybe to come back to the project that you've just finished looking at AI use cases. So can you tell us a little bit more about why you think it's so important to look at AI use cases in the African context, and maybe think a little bit about like what are some of the essential ingredients that you found were necessary across the different use cases?
Yeah, so the AI for Social Good project was really an eye-opener for me as a researcher as well, because it's one thing to just talk about AI very broadly, but it gives us an opportunity to actually understand and to get that first-hand experience on what African AI researchers and African innovators are actually doing on the ground. And I think that what was also important about this project was we looked at some of these use cases within different contexts. So we had to look at how is AI being used for diagnostics in health? How is AI being used by smallholder farmers? How is AI being used in schools? So it gave us a bigger picture of some of the practical day-to-day use cases where I remember when we're working with Philomena on the health paper and just doing a bit of reading around that to say, instead of a patient having to walk 5 or 10 kilometers just to get a consultation with a doctor, you are now able to get that service online, and there are AI tools that are able to actually interact with you from the comfort of your home. So doctors are now clearing small time to spend with patients instead of doing a lot of administrative tasks, because they are now using some of the AI tools that exist. The same with within the education sector, for example, that learners are now able to use different AI tools for personalized learning, for example, for intelligent tutoring. If you are a slow learner, you can still be able to grasp because there is a tool, an online tool that is available to cater to your needs. So these are practical day-to-day AI use cases that we're actually unpacking. And I think that what's important when we look at it that way, it kind of shifts our understanding of technology. So in as much as some think that this AI hype is about just providing techno solutions, if you're able to actually look at some of the work that is actually being done and some of the use cases that are actually being promoted within the African context, you actually see real value and how it's actually changing people's lives and changing a lot of communities, for example. And one thing, again, that actually stood out in this project was how AI researchers and innovators are also understanding those risks around AI to say, we do not have sufficient data in Africa. What are we doing to actually build our own data sets? If the data that we are using is discriminatory or biased, what are we doing to actually build data that is a true representation of African data? And there's a lot of work that is going in there. I mean, with large language models, I think that's a good example of the work that the Masakane community is doing, because they are really going into communities and trying to get as much data as they can about African.
Can you elaborate on the Masakana community?
It's a community that is working on trying to preserve African languages and building these large language models based on African languages. So they're actively going into communities and try to collect and gather as much African languages data as they can. And what's also interesting was actually there's work that they were doing with the Center for Intellectual Property, CPIT, at Strathmore University, where they said they wanted to build, initially when they started the project, they wanted to build large language models and started looking for existing data. And the existing data sets that was there was by the Jehovah's Witness, the church.
Interesting.
So they checked on the website for Jehovah's Witness to see if they could use that data, because when they were translating the Bible, they managed to translate the Bible in all African languages. So it was good data to use. But then on the website of the Jehovah's Witness, they said there is a copyright, so which doesn't allow you to use that data. So CPIT was explaining that it was something like a wake-up call for them to say, why does a U.S. company or a U.S. based organization own intellectual property over our own languages? It just doesn't make sense. And because there are intellectual properties in place, you can't really use data. So they had to go back, the community, the Masakane community, they had to go back again, started their own data collection and trying to build these large language models. So when you look at it from that perspective, you actually see the work that is actually going into AI research in Africa, that it's not just about them trying to import solutions from elsewhere. Innovators are really looking into what can be done to build our own AI systems, what can be done to actually develop these solutions that can actually address some of the challenges that African countries have. And through this project again, and then just the use cases that we're looking at, it's mainly young people. It's mainly young people who are really innovating. And that also gives you an idea that a lot of Africans and young people, they don't want to be consumers only. They are also having that mentality of, we want to be producers, we want to be innovators. And this idea, for example, of the African Continental Free Trade Area, looking at Africa, shouldn't just look at it as a target market. It's also a market where you can have these developers who are doing amazing work on developing use cases in health, in agriculture, in transportation, and different areas. So the project was also quite important in the sense that it's able to also showcase some of these use cases that young people are developing and what they're actually doing in practice to solve some of the problems. And broadly, I think focusing on use cases is also what a lot of African governments are really trying to achieve. When we started working on the project, when we were going through the African Union Continental AI Strategy, we actually found out that one of the goals of the strategy is African countries need to find ways in which to create value from AI. And that's where AI use cases come in, that we need to focus more on different sectors where we can focus on these AI use cases to see the value that comes up with these AI use cases. And I think that's also an indication to say, yes, there is an AI hub that's happening, but African countries are also seeing the real value. They want to see what can this technology do for public transportation, what can this technology do for administration. And we're talking earlier that it's really not just about the fear of missing out. It's really about looking at the consequences of being left behind. We were left behind during the first, second, and third industrial revolutions. And now African countries are saying with the fourth industrial revolution, we cannot afford to be left out. So
this is so, I think it's really important again to mention again the fact that, Africa is a young continent. It's oversaid in some cases, but I think here it is where it's so important to mention again, the youth of the African continent compared to Europe or other continents. And as you say, the fact that, Africa cannot afford for all of these youth to be simply consumers of technology, that there is this need to really invest in those young people to actually make use of these technologies and to build the technologies of tomorrow, because otherwise there are potentially going to be some very negative consequences, as it were.
No, I definitely agree with you. And that reminds me again, when we were working with a colleague, Daniel, on the project on AI in smallholder farming, when we were interviewing different people, they were saying that because of digital agriculture and use of AI, we are seeing more and more young people having an interest in farming. Back in the day, young people did not want to be involved in farming at all. They thought it's just for old people. But now, because they have all these tools, there are drones, you can use different devices, they are now more and more interested, and they are also now entering the farming community and the agricultural sector, basically. So there is definitely an interest, especially from young people, young innovators who are actually seeing a potential to use technology to address some of the challenges that exist. And of course, because I remember we were looking at the different national AI strategies, and all of them, they also mention the same thing. We want to develop AI use cases, and we want these use cases to actually demonstrate and show us the potential that the technology has. Rwanda's strategy, in Egypt's strategy, they all talk about these AI use cases. So I think that even going forward, there is need to really focus a lot on these work on the innovations that our young people are doing, and focusing more on these use cases, because that's the only way you can actually realize the value of technology, AI technology in Africa.
It's good. It's interesting. You mentioned the use case on agriculture, which is the one also that you led on, and you are yourself the daughter of farmers from rural Zimbabwe. So this is a topic that I think is close to your heart. And I remember you talking about how you're discussing this also with your family, the work that you're doing. Can you briefly mention a couple of the ways in which AI could prove transformative in agriculture?
Yes, definitely. So maybe to make it easier, I should paint a picture of what it was like 15, 20 years ago. So back in the day when I was growing up, my father he still has, it's a 50-hectare farm. So they are considered small-scale farmers. And growing up, whenever we received rains, he would always walk to our neighbors, like 2 kilometers, just to go check how much rainfall had fallen on their rain gauge. Why? Because that was the only way to know how much rainfall had fallen. Or alternatively, he would wait for the news, the 6 o'clock news in the evening, to just get a general sense on whether a report of how much rainfall was expected in our province or in our region. And fast forward to 2025, he doesn't need to do that anymore. He has an app on his phone. If it rains, he can just check on the app. It shows him how much rainfall was received specifically in his area. And he's only able to do that because we have these technologies that are AI empowered, which are making it possible for him to actually look at weather updates to know how much rain is falling, when it's going to fall. And another example I can also give is a lot of farmers back in the day, they had, if you have crops and you suspect that there is pests or disease that you're not familiar with, either you had to call the agriculture extension officer, who would be maybe 10 kilometers away, to come to your farm and then check to see what kind of pests or diseases are on your crops. But now we have so many image-based applications where a farmer needs to do is take a picture, upload it on the app, and the app would tell them exactly what that disease or that what kind of pests are on his crops. So again, that's because we have these technologies that are really transforming AI that are really transforming agriculture. And when we were working on this project, we actually found out that there are so many uses. It's not just weather forecasting. It's not just disease prediction. It's not just yield prediction. Innovators are even going to the extent of saying a lot of, especially smallholder farmers, they do not have access to insurance for different reasons. What kind of packages can we give them? And I remember we interviewed one researcher who was saying that they have developed a platform which allows a farmer to, if you take out insurance with them, they allow you to say there is damage to your crop. You just take photos, upload it on the system, and then they can assess the extent of the damage, and then they provide you with cover. And I was like, yeah, how do you know they're actually providing you with the right images from their farms? And they say, no, when they're uploading, they need to also upload with the metadata. So the metadata of the photo will actually show the actual location of the farm. So it's easier for them. So these are some of the technologies that it's something that is not really on agriculture, but it's there to support farmers in a sense.
This is so interesting, and thank you for also sharing a bit of your own experience, because I think it really brings home how much this can actually impact families and really change the way that farmers actually work. In both this work that you did on agriculture, but also across the other use cases, I think you found that there were some essential ingredients that were kind of common across the different use cases. And I guess, what are those components that basically make this innovation possible, or that make it harder for young people in these contexts to actually come up with these solutions?
So I think throughout the project, I would say the work we did on education, on agriculture, on health, when we're now looking at the recommendation, what do we need to do? What do African policymakers need to do? There were really common themes across, and the main one being infrastructure. So in as much as we want to talk about AI and all these beautiful things that innovation can bring, we still need to address the question of infrastructure. So like I said earlier, in Africa, we already have a big problem with lack of data. So issues of around data deficits. what is being done or what needs to be done to actually build data. And even when you look at government data, there is not enough. Either it's incorrect, it's not up to date, or it just doesn't exist. So I think that's one area where the focus should also be about data. What are we doing to actually build African data, to collect the African data, and then be able to build our own models? And then part again of that conversation on infrastructure would definitely be about building our data centers, because in as much when we talk about AI and data, we need to have facilities where the data is going to be processed. So that's a big issue. Do we have enough data centers in Africa? The answer is no. I think those who have actually looked into this were saying that across the whole African continent, the number of data centers are still less than the ones that are in Switzerland. And we are a whole continent with 54 countries. So we really need to focus more on questions around building our own data centers to be able to process a lot of these data, massive amounts of data that are being processed and produced. And I think part of that conversation when linking it to AI is we definitely need to have these high processing computing facilities. We really need to have these supercomputers. We might not be producing our own AI chips. We do not have those capabilities yet, but we still need to have these supercomputers to facilitate and to help us to scale our innovation. And again, importance of energy. We need the data centers to be powered. Where is this energy going to come from? And a lot of countries, even big economies like South Africa and Nigeria, they have this challenge of energy infrastructure. So it's something that, yes, at face value, it might not necessarily be investing in AI, but it's something that is needed it's a foundational layer needed for us to talk about innovation. So I think another important area again is on human capacity and development, looking at digital skills and AI skills. So with the work that we were doing, for example, farmers to be able to use some of these tools, they need to be digitally literate. So it's important to also think of ways in which that everyone gets to be trained and get some form of digital skills that they need to be able to use some of these tools that are available. And then on AI skills, I think there is importance for us to actually have a lot of skilled professionals, and be it in universities, in colleges, TVET, for example, where a lot of these courses they are being offered and a lot of students are actually being trained. And lastly, we already spoke about data governance and data protection. I think it's also a cross-cutting issue that for us to move forward, we definitely need to have strong frameworks on data governance, and we need to have the right laws in place and enforcement on data protection laws.
There's a lot of different elements there that I think are already kind of being discussed within the context of the EU-AU partnership. And at ECDPM, we work a lot on EU-AU relations. There's an upcoming summit in November in Angola. And I think that many of these topics, and particularly the delivery of the Global Gateway initiative, which has promised to invest 150 billion in infrastructure in Africa, would be really one of the key topics that would be discussed there, and how much the EU is actually delivering on that. But this conversation points already to some of the elements in terms of where the EU needs to be. And I think in some cases is already looking at investing in energy infrastructure in particular. And we're doing a lot of work on that here at ECDPM as well. But also data centers, and And even I think there is work taking place around looking into how might the EU actually collaborate with African partners around building some of these AI factories along the same lines of what is planned in Europe on the African continent. But you explore other avenues for international cooperation in the three papers under this project. Could you expand maybe a little bit more on some of the areas where you think there's real potential for cooperation, and that with the upcoming summit should be discussed more?
Yes, definitely. So what we found was that actually Europe and Africa has a very strong partnership. So when we are now looking at this partnership through the AI lens, it's not starting from scratch. It's really a matter of looking at what do we currently have, what Team Europe initiatives do we currently have, for example, what projects are being funded under the Global Gateway, for example, and then how do we build on existing projects. So what I actually found across the three papers was, when we're doing the research, was it's a matter of really looking at existing initiatives that are in place, and then looking at, for example, when we were looking at on education, we actually found out that there are so many initiatives. I can't remember them at the top of my head, but there are so many initiatives specifically supporting education and TVET in Africa, but nothing specifically on AI. There are digital skills programs in place and other programs in place. So I think going forward, it's more coming in with that thinking to say, how can we add AI to existing initiatives, for example? And even when you look at the AU innovation agenda or the Africa-Europe innovation platform, these are existing platforms that are there to support research and innovation. And of course, it's now coming in with that AI lens to see what kind of AI research particularly do we need to start focusing on, for example, in which areas. And I think going in again, what could actually help is also adopting that approach that is set out in the AI continental strategy by the African Union of identifying use cases in these three areas. We want to focus on research and innovation on AI. Let's look in agriculture. Let's look in health. Let's look in education, for example. I think that would be one way of actually supporting and advancing existing work. And in other areas, again, I think there's a lot of work that Team Europe, for example, on data governance, they're already doing, and they can still continue to build up on that. A lot of countries, I think less than 15 countries have AI strategies in place. So there is still a lot that needs to be done. And I think I see that as a potential again for programs like the Data Governance for Africa to actually continue.
Which is a program that is led by the EU and several member states, including Germany, France, exactly, and Finland, just for those who don't know already.
Yes, exactly. So I think that such programs can definitely support some of the AI governance initiatives that are taking place in Africa. Not talking about regulation or laws specifically, but national strategies and national policies on AI. And I think looking again at supporting innovation hubs, there is a lot of interest, I think, especially when you look at the small and medium income SMEs, for example, and looking at tech hubs across Africa that are looking for investments. So I think that's also an area where the focus should be on how to support some of these tech hubs, emerging tech hubs across Africa, who are mainly trying to leverage the technology, AI specifically, and to innovate. So the way that I saw it with this project was the partnership that currently exists between Europe and Africa is strong enough, and what needs to be done is just trying to take it a bit further and just trying to look at new ways of actually integrating some of these AI initiatives in programs that already exist.
And maybe just to add to that, scaling up investments in not in agriculture, in infrastructure again, which is what I'm working on a lot at the moment. There's really, it's been quite slow moving to start with. The Global Gateway Initiative was announced in 2022, but it has taken quite a lot of time for it to really start moving forward and to begin to announce really big infrastructure projects. And I think there is going to be a need in the coming years to really see a lot more delivery on that, because really what the African continent needs is infrastructure as well in order to power, these future innovations. Thank you once again for joining me today. This has been a really great conversation, and I'm so glad to discuss your work with you. And I hope we'll have you back again in the future.
Thank you so much, Chloe. It was really fun talking about this work we have been doing, and I look forward to future engagements.